forward formula, rise, drill, fall, and overturn, qi, zhuang, lu, fan, is a method or a formula which is used to describe how force, motion, and energy are generated and applied to martial arts, or as a way to develop whole body or unified body power. In discussing rise, drill, fall, and overturn, one should really begin this discussion by understanding that this particular formula is based upon yin-yang theory, yin and yang, or Taiji energetics, which is essentially the idea of how the inner relationship of yin and yang can be expressed in various formations and various perspectives. When we use this yin-yang perspective, we're also using concepts that will direct you in terms of understanding how to train. If we begin by using yin and yang as the primary perspective, then we can use all these various subsets of yin and yang to break down this forward formula to a greater degree. We can look at perspectives that discuss the exterior motion of rise and drill, fall and overturn, versus the internal mechanics, the outside and inside perspective based upon yin-yang theory. We can look at the synthesis analysis perspective of rise, drill, fall, and overturn. And this means that we can break it down into 4 components and then reconstruct it into a single integrated series of actions. We can look at the long and short perspective of rise, drill, fall, and overturn. We can look at the circular and linear perspective of rise, drill, fall, and overturn. And generally speaking, in discussing rise, drill, fall, and overturn with martial artists, particularly outside of Chinese martial arts, if they're familiar with this concept of rise, drill, fall, and overturn, they generally understand it in relationship to forms like first of the 5 element fist of Xing Yi Quan, splitting fist, where you see a step-by-step description of rise and drill, fall and overturn, or in Bagua circle walk, where you also see this rise and drill, fall and overturn movement pattern. Or in stationary drills such as piercing palm, where you can again see the rise and drill, fall and overturn. All of these examples, however, are indicative of using this forward formula to develop hand methods. If you really look into the use of rise, drill, fall, and overturn in martial arts, however, you'll find that hand methods only make up a small percentage of the types of martial art movement patterns that you see using rise, drill, fall, and overturn. So for an example, you could see that rise and drill, fall and overturn, and developing a front kick. Rise and drill, fall, and overturn, and developing a back kick, and developing a throw. You can see rise, drill, fall, and overturn to develop a elbow method. Rise and drill, fall, and overturn. There's a number of different variants of understanding this type of rise and drill, fall, and overturn expression through various dimensions of space. We can distinguish right away that the rising and drilling motions are both yang components, yang characteristics. Rising is a yang characteristic. And outward rotation is a yang characteristic, and that's what happens in drilling. These are both, in a sense, kind of expansive movements, rising, and rotating toward the outside. That, of course, is followed up by the falling and overturning. Falling is obviously yin in nature. Overturning is yin because it's an inward rotation. Outward is expansion, is yang. Inward is contraction, is yin. So ultimately, when we break down this forward formula using the yin-yang perspective, we can see right away the basic nature of this formula. We can understand that the division of the yang half and the yin half is a very necessary type of distinction to make. And from that perspective, we can see essentially that this is constructed in such a way where you have the launch and release. We're not only releasing our innate power, we're also using their power to bridge our way into the falling and release power of this, in this case, the splitting fist. Oftentimes, the release of the power is inadequate because the preparation is insufficient. So, as we prepare to launch, we're essentially loading, storing the energy of the rooster leg, the dragon body, the tiger head, the dragon waist, and the bear shoulders. They go into the store mode, and now they're being ready to release. So we have at least 5 types of power being released into the falling and overturning phase, into the yin phase. We can see that the basic construct of rise, drill, fall, and overturn is a yang and yin division of components. And that you could call the primary structure. Inside of that primary structure, we have 2 subsets, wherein we can find methods of martial application. We can find methods of training, and we can find as well certain types of simple strategies embedded within these subsets. Rising and falling. This particular subset is very important in and of itself. Even used without the drilling and overturning, rise and fall is a very important subset to understand and to flesh out as well. The subset of drilling, of rotation and counter rotation. Rotation and counter rotation. Drilling and overturning. Drilling and overturning. We should also understand the outside-inside mechanics, or the outside shape in relationship to the internal mechanics, to get a full picture of the yin-yang process. So in this discussion of rise, drill, fall, and overturn, it's good to take a kind of natural example of this power entrainment that we see outside of martial arts. Furthermore, we can begin the discussion by understanding the unification of the exterior motion of rise, drill, fall, and overturn in coordination with the internal mechanics, where we have this essentially perspective of inside and outside. As an initial discussion, it's good to take a natural example of this kind of kinetic chain of store and release dynamics that you see in this forward formula, rise, drill, fall, and overturn. And a very common one that comes to mind is the way in which somebody would instinctually pick something up off the ground, maybe a rock, a stick, whatever the case may be, and wind up, throw that object. And in so doing, in looking at that particular example, we can slow down the kinetic chain and look at the entire formula piece by piece. There's, generally speaking, a very natural inclination to do this kind of wind up, where you step forward and then draw back, And as we do that, what are we doing? We're essentially initiating this type of one-legged power, this danzong single-weightedness power, movement of the weight from foot to foot, where there's always an empty and a full. From a martial arts point of view, it is sometimes called rooster leg. So not only is there a wind-up through the extremities, but the entire body is going through this forward and back wind-up as well. And then ultimately, as the body shifts, it rotates to get this massive core power unified with the shifting of the weight from foot to foot. We also have this type of undulation that you can see, that's a longitudinal part of this train of power, where we see the rooster leg in this kind of dragon body movement, the undulation of the longitudinal movement into this rise and fall type of entrainment, in coordination with the rotation, which is sometimes called the dragon waist. So this dragon idea is that there's an undulation going up and down, but there's also the rotation through the body to the left and the right simultaneously. This is really the way that a dragon moves. It doesn't just undulate in space like this, but it also has the rotation and counter rotation. So we have the chicken foot, the dragon body, the tiger head, because as we sink back into this falling motion, the chin tucks in, and as we release into this overturning aspect of the throw, you can also see there's a release of the head. It goes from this tuck position to the release of the neck and head, very similar to the mechanics of the tiger head, wherein the rooster leg, dragon body, and tiger head work together to create this kind of rise and fall entrainment of power in coordination with the dragon waist, bear shoulder. The exterior movement that we're looking at of the rise and drill, fall, and overturn is all being coordinated in unification with the internal mechanics. It ultimately looks like what we would call the eagle handshake, which is essentially amalgamation of all these kinetic chains coming together to produce this rising and falling, outward rotation and inward rotation. It's essentially the exterior power that's being expressed through the internal mechanics. From the analytical point of view, we can look at this forward formula as four isolated components, four individual components.